Richard Dawkins is an evolutionary biologist at Oxford University. He's the author of the influential book, The Selfish Gene. Currently, he's considered one of the so-called new atheists, a group of writers who are attacking the concept of religion. Dawkins was at ASU recently to talk about his new book, The God Delusion. Larry Lemon spoke with Dawkins before his lecture.
Professor Dawkins, you're here to talk about your new book, The God Delusion. Can you give us sort of an overview of the premise that you have for that book?
That the existence of God is a scientific hypothesis like any other. It's a scientific hypothesis which doesn't have any evidence in favor of it, and rather a lot of evidence, I think, against it. That's the first half of the book. And then the second half of the book is that the very existence of religion in the world is, on balance, a force for evil rather than a force for good.
Can you talk about that in terms of, I know there's so many problems in the world today. You're talking about religious fundamentalism. Was that one of the reasons why you felt compelled to write the book?
No, I think I'd give higher priority to the scientific issue, because I do, unlike some of my scientific colleagues, I do think it is a scientific issue, whether there is a great spirit, a great intellect behind the universe. It seems to me to be a very interesting scientific question. So that is my first priority. However, the timing of the book, you could say, yes, there does seem to be a resurgence of religious influence in the world, not only in America, but in the Middle East as well. And that did rather prompt me to think it was a good thing to do.
And in those terms, too, I know about the OUT campaign that you were talking about, that atheists should be more open about their atheism because it hasn't been so in the past. So I was thinking that this might be one step in that direction.
Yes, it is a step in that direction. I think that there is what may actually be a bit of a myth about America, that America is a supremely religious country. It certainly appears so. I mean, all presidential candidates in America have to talk about God in every speech, otherwise they don't get elected, and they daren't mention that they're atheists, which some of them must be, because it just doesn't make any sense that in a population of people of intelligence and education, that literally none of them in Congress, say, would be atheists. Of course they are. So to that extent, it probably is true that America is a very religious country, in the sense that everybody thinks it is. But I believe that there's a tremendous groundswell of non-religious opinion in America, but none of them know that the others exist, and so they need to come out, they need to break out, rather as the gay community did in 20 or 30 years ago. Atheists need to come out and show people that they're ordinary, decent, nice people, good people, just like everybody else.
Could you talk a little bit about, in terms of the scientific aspect, how would you characterize the creation of the universe in terms of its complexity, and how it seems to be perfect for life? It seems to be perfect to do the things that we do. How is it that it evolved to such a state?
Right. First of all, the complexity that impresses us most is biological complexity, and that we now understand, although that used to be always used to be thought of as an argument for the existence of a God. Ever since 1859 and the publication of Darwin's Origin of Species, we've known that that's not true. So the really big argument for a God as a designer was destroyed by Darwin. Now we're left with a possible physicist's argument. What produced the universe in the first place? Why are the physical constants, the constants of the universe, so apparently beautifully set up to give rise to life? It has been argued by physicists, among them Paul Davies, that if any of those constants were slightly different, then we wouldn't have the universe as we know it, and we wouldn't have life. Some people see that as an argument for a designer. I emphatically don't, because you haven't explained anything. I mean, if it's difficult enough to explain how those physical constants came into being, it's even harder to explain how something as complicated as a designer could come into being. So what we're looking for is the physicist's equivalent of a Darwin. Biology has had its Darwin, and biology is now essentially explained. Physics hasn't had its Darwin yet. So we have a gap in our understanding. But for a scientist, a gap is a challenge. It's something that we're trying to break into, trying to understand. And so I believe that those questions that we don't yet understand, many of them will be answered, including perhaps the origin of the physical constants. Even if they're not, however, even if there are some questions in physics that we shall never know the answer to, it emphatically doesn't mean that because scientists don't know the answer, theologians do.
Well, I know that many people who are very religious will describe what you're describing as a kind of religion in itself. I mean, they're saying, well, this is my religion, this is what I believe, this is your theory, this is what you believe. Is science a religion? Could it be described as a religion?
No, that's a very. I'm very familiar with what you're saying, and it's a very pernicious idea. The idea that, well, your opinion's as good as mine, and we each have our own opinion, and we're entitled to it. Well, we're entitled to it, of course. But the question is, which side has the evidence? Evidence is all important, and scientific beliefs are not opinions. Scientific beliefs are based upon evidence, masses of evidence. Huge quantities of evidence, all pointing in the same direction, whereas the religious beliefs that oppose them are not based on any evidence at all.
I had seen in one of the previous things that you had done about how you bemoaned the fact that science was not being taught so well in schools. There wasn't an appreciation for scientific method or really what it was. Do you consider that to be one of the primary reasons why people might fall back? I know in certain communities in America they do. Even school boards fall back on wanting to teach intelligent design.
Yes.
Or a lack of evolution.
I think the scientists have fallen down in their responsibility to educate. I mean, you'd be amazed by the number of people who think that because living things are complicated, as I said before about, eyes look beautifully designed, that means there must be a God. I mean, they clearly haven't the faintest idea about evolution, which is a beautiful explanation. And I stress beautiful because not only is it correct, it also is so elegant, and a child who is deprived of the privilege of understanding where she comes from, why she's the way she is, why the whole of life is the way it is, that is such a privilege to be able to understand it. It's a privilege that's granted to anybody who lived after 1859, and we are in that category, of course. It's not a privilege that was granted to our medieval forebears. And they were very unfortunate not to have had that privilege. We are very fortunate to have it, and how very sad it is that so many children are not given it. They're deprived of it by bigoted religious interests that actually try to subvert the scientific education of children.
Professor Dawkins, thanks so much for visiting Horizon.
Thank you very much indeed.